So the world of diplomacy does not get bigger than this. To use the words of the President Joe Biden, he has described this visit by the Indian Prime Minister as an inflection point. Now, the Indian Prime Minister arrived at the White House to an electric atmosphere just a little while back. He'll also be holding bilateral talks in just a moment from now, and both leaders will be addressing the members of the press after the talks. New Delhi and Washington are expected to deepen their defense ties and also technology cooperation. And this is going to be a whole host of different aspects that are going to be discussed between President Biden and the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, ahead of the top-level bilateral talks, both the American President and the Indian Prime Minister addressed a crowd that was gathered at the South Lawn of the White House. Now, hundreds of members of the Indian-American diaspora lined up outside the South Lawn to get a glimpse of the Indian Prime Minister. And what is interesting is that anecdote that was shared by the Indian Prime Minister, where he said that 30 years ago he had visited the United States of America as a common man, and he had stood outside the gates of the White House and had looked at the White House at that moment. But now he has said that since then there have been several occasions since he had become the Prime Minister that he has been received at the White House. But for the first time ever, there have been so many members of the Indian-American diaspora who have been invited inside of the White House at the time when he in fact addressed all those people in the South Lawns of the White House there. So these are live visuals that are coming in from inside of the White House, where the Indian Prime Minister and the American President are seated together for the bilateral talks. So there'll be a whole host of different issues that are being discussed. Cooperation between India and the United States will deepen in manners that we perhaps had not expected before. Defense is going to be a key cornerstone of the India-US equation. But apart from that, there are several commonalities within the Indian society and within the American society that has been stressed upon. Now, both these nations are proud democracies. One is the oldest democracy, another is the world's largest democracy. And this is a handshake that is, as President Biden has described it, an inflection point in the India-America equation, because the United States is looking for allies at the moment. The rise of China and the belligerence that China has exhibited in the South China Sea and indeed in the Pacific Ocean is something that the United States is not very comfortable with. So how does the United States deal with China? It had earlier tried to rely on its European allies to try and contain China, but that of course has not been happening. What the United States is looking for at the moment is of course a reliable ally that the United States can, of course, depend upon. And my colleague Siddhant Sibil at this moment, we're given to understand, is just outside the White House. He's joining us live on this broadcast. Siddhant, we're getting these visuals of the Indian Prime Minister and the American President Joe Biden sitting inside the White House. And we're given to understand that the bilateral talks are about to begin in some time. You know, give us a sense of how crucial this particular state visit of the Indian Prime Minister is, because to borrow a phrase that was used by the American President, he has described this visit as an inflection point in the Indian-American equation.
Well, yes, Mohammed, we just came out from the Oval Office where the Indian Prime Minister and the American President Joe Biden are holding a bilateral meeting. We saw those opening statements. WION was present there, and the US President talked about the Indian presidency of the G20. He's expected to travel to India later this year to attend the G20 summit as a member country. But he also talked about convergences between India-US relationship. The Indian Prime Minister talked about the people-to-people relationship, something that we have been saying since a long time. In fact, we were present at the South Lawn of the White House, and the energy was just ecstatic. It was something out of the world. It looked like India, and in fact, it looked like a visible manifestation of how India and US have been converging their relationship, and at the heart of this is people-to-people ties. The Indian Prime Minister also used a particular phrase, which I remember he said that the real engine of India-US relationship is people-to-people ties, and from the depths of ocean to the heights of sky. This is how the Indian Prime Minister described the relationship between the two countries. Essentially, now focus will be on the joint press conference that both the leaders will be leading. I'm standing just in front of the location where the joint press conference will be taking place. And of course, this is something, another key focus area where, of course, leaders will lay out their vision for the relationship and as to how they look forward to make sure that both the countries can work together, especially in the Indo-Pacific. In fact, during that opening statement, both the leaders talked about international situation. There was no particular mention. In fact, the US President talked about Ukraine during his statement at the South Lawns of the White House. But essentially, it's given that whether it's aggressive China or whether it's Russia or Russia-China conflict, these things will be on the table as both the leaders hold talks, and of course the press statement as well.
Absolutely, indeed, and also considering the different issues that are going to be spoken about, Siddhant, the fact is, you know, when relationships such as this are forged, these are something that will have their impact for decades to come. Now, what is interesting is that the reason why, when Prime Minister Narendra Modi was in the United States back in 2016, he had said something very interesting, and I want to quote him here, where he had said that we've left behind the hesitation of the past, and we're now moving into a new era, and that is, of course, what is being taken forward from here on. Now, over the course of the last several decades, India had relied on the former Soviet Union and then Russia to get its defense hardware. But now, increasingly, what we are looking at is that the United States is more willing to share its defense technologies, and not just that, also is willing to transfer its defense technologies to India. How is that likely to play out during this meeting?
Well, we saw the big ticket announcement being made earlier today as to how GE and HAL will be looking forward for co-production. In fact, I have heard co-production word being used several times now when it comes to India-US relationship, and this time it's no different. Both sides are keen on making sure that there is something practical happening in their relationship in terms of cooperation, and defense forms a key pillar of that. We will see more announcements, including on Predator drone deals and also semiconductors as well. But, you know, India is keen that there is more make in India defense, and India has been keen to invite a foreign partner, whosoever it might be. India has good foreign relationship in terms of the defense aspect, whether it's with Russia, whether it's with the United States. But now India wants to become an exporter of defense equipments. It is looking at Africa as a major market when it comes to defense equipments. In fact, the Prime Minister travels to Egypt from the United States, and in Egypt we know that the Egyptians are keen for India's LCA Tejas, and India, in fact, Egypt can be a kind of platform for the wider African market. But without digressing from the larger conversation that is the India-US defense relationship, there have been several aspects to it. There have been multilateral exercises that have been happening on a regular basis. In fact, the US Defense Secretary had visited India earlier this month, and that conversation saw a lot of convergences, especially when it comes to dealing with a very aggressive China. We have to wait for the joint statement when it comes out.
Absolutely, indeed. And also the fact, you know, the people-to-people interaction between the United States and India plays such an important role. And for this, the United States has announced that it will be opening 2 new consulates, one in Bengaluru and another one in Ahmedabad. And apart from this, there are also some changes that are expected in the H-1B visas, where these H-1B visas can in fact be renewed by Indians within America.
Well, for sure, these are topics of conversation when it comes to both the leaders, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the US President Joe Biden, sitting there at the Oval Office. In fact, even as we speak, the conversation is underway. The focus, of course, will just not be on trade, on energy, on defense, which has been, in fact, talked about several times in past few days ahead of the Indian Prime Minister's visit, but also the global geopolitics. Now, India and the US are two large democracies, and this was something that was emphasized by the US President Joe Biden during his opening statement in that bilateral. And both countries will be keen that when it comes to democracies and like-minded countries, they work together in not only in the bilateral framework, but in the larger framework as well. Quad is something that the US President mentioned from the South Lawns of the White House, and also focus will be how both countries can work on diversifying the supply chain. Now, we know that supply chains have been seen excessively dependent on China, and focus will be on how they can be not only diversified, but there can be a de-risking from the Chinese economy, given that while India and US both have not so very good relationship with Beijing, the economic relationship is significant even for India as well. Despite the Galwan incident, the trading relationship has been going forward. So this is something that India would like to reduce, and this is something where the Americans can play an important role.
Indeed, and those aspects that you did touch upon, the issues that India, of course, has with China and the convergences that India and the United States have in terms of how it is important and how to deal with the Chinese belligerence in the region is a key aspect of it. But also gives a sense, Siddhant, of how Quad will now move forward, because India and the United States, besides Japan and Australia, are members of the Quad. And considering that the India-America equation is getting stronger, how is this likely to strengthen Quad as well?
Well, the fact that the Indian Prime Minister mentioned about the Quad from the South Lawns of the White House is not going to be missed in Tokyo or in Canberra. We know that Quad is something that has increased its momentum in terms of engagement. It was just at official level just few years ago in 2017, and since then the momentum has been quite fast in terms of engagement, especially at the official level. Now, Quad, of course, has been working on issues like humanitarian assistance in the wider Indo-Pacific region, and of course focus has been on basically positive agenda, something that the officials have been talking about. Now, China doesn't see it like that way, and even Russians also are not very happy about Quad. So where does Quad go? So Quad basically will see more reaffirmation by the partner countries, including India, which has a good relationship with Russia.